I was tightening the last rusted bolt on an old tractor engine when the sound hit me. It was not the thunder of a storm or the sharp crack of a gunshot. It was a deep, booming thud that echoed across the empty hills like something tearing open the quiet world I lived in. I froze, wrench in hand, listening. Then came the second sound, a high, thin scream carried by the wind. It was the scream of a child. I dropped the wrench and ran toward the road that cut through the valley below my farm. The sun was sinking low and the sky burned orange in long streaks that made everything look like it had been set on fire even before I reached the wreck. A minivan had slammed through a wire fence and lay tilted on its side against a ditch. Flames crawled from beneath the hood, licking upward with a hungry crackle that spread faster every second. Smoke flooded from the engine and curled around the shattered windows like dark fingers. 2 little girls were inside. One was crying for her mother, and the other was coughing so hard she could barely breathe. Their tiny hands pressed against the glass, their faces streaked with soot and terror. The mother was slumped forward in the driver's seat, held back only by a twisted seatbelt that had locked around her like a trap. Her head was bleeding. She was conscious enough to look at me when I reached the door, but her voice was weak and broken. "Please help them. Please." I tried the door handle. Nothing. The impact had crushed the frame. I grabbed a crowbar I kept in my truck and smashed it against the glass. The first hit did nothing. The second cracked the corner. The third shattered it. Heat blasted into my face as I reached inside and lifted the girls out one at a time. They clung to me, shaking uncontrollably, their small arms locked around my neck, as if they believed letting go meant falling into the fire. I set them safely on the grass away from the spreading flames and turned back to the driver's seat. The heat was brutal now. My eyes burned and the air tasted like gasoline. The woman lifted her head again, dazed, whispering something I could not understand. I wedged the crowbar into the crushed door seam and pulled with everything I had until the metal groaned and bent just enough for me to squeeze inside. She tried to lift her arms, but the seatbelt held her down. When I reached for the buckle, my hand stopped. The belt was not frayed from impact or torn from pressure. It was sliced, a clean, sharp cut right through the webbing. I stared at it for a split second, the truth striking so cold that it almost drowned out the fire. Someone had cut this belt before the crash. This was not an accident. She met my eyes, then tears carving pale streaks through the soot on her cheeks. "He did this. He will not stop." Her voice was barely more than a breath, but the terror in it was real. I pulled my pocket knife and cut the already damaged belt. She tumbled forward into my arms as flames burst through the dashboard and rolled toward us. I carried her out and ran as fast as my legs could move. We were about 20 yards away when the minivan exploded in a surge of heat and sound that shook the air like a shockwave. The girls screamed, and I shielded them with my body as burning debris rained down behind us. The mother coughed violently, clutching her ribs, her eyes unfocused with pain. I kept an arm around her to steady her as she struggled to breathe. Sirens were nowhere. The road was empty. The sky was turning darker by the minute. She looked at the destroyed vehicle smoldering in the field and whispered the same words again this time with a clarity that made every hair on my arms stand up. "He did this. He will not stop." I glanced at the cut belt again, the flames reflecting in the metal pieces scattered across the grass. Whoever she was running from had tried to kill her and her children. They had not planned for me to be nearby. I pressed my hand against her back to keep her upright and nodded, not sure what else to say. The little girls clung to my legs and would not let go. I was a mechanic, a man who lived alone on a quiet piece of land that most people forgot existed. I was not supposed to be in the middle of something like this. But there, in the fading light, with the smell of burned metal filling the air and 2 terrified children trembling at my feet, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I had just saved 3 lives that someone very powerful had meant to erase. And by doing that, I had just stepped directly into the crosshairs of a man who would not hesitate to burn my entire world to the ground to finish what he started. The sun had slipped below the hills by the time I got the mother and her two girls into my truck, and the sky had taken on that deep blue hush that comes right before full darkness. The little ones were wrapped in an old blanket I kept behind the seat, shivering more from fear than from the cooling air. Their mother Rebecca leaned against the window, breathing in short, shallow bursts, her face pale under streaks of dried blood. She never looked back at the burning wreck. It was as if she already knew looking would break something inside her that she needed to keep intact in order to survive the next hour. When we pulled into my driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires, the girls clung to her hands tightly. My porch light flickered as it always did when the wind picked up, but tonight even that small sound made her jump. I opened the truck door for her and helped her down. Her legs wobbled like she had run miles barefoot. Nora, the older girl, with wide, frightened eyes, held onto my jacket sleeve like she thought the ground itself might swallow her if she let go. Lenny, the younger one, pressed her face into her mother's hip, whispering something too soft for me to hear. The house felt too quiet as I led them up the steps. I had lived alone so long that the sudden presence of 3 people made the place feel smaller, almost crowded with something I had forgotten how to name. I pushed the door open and warm air drifted out, carrying the faint scent of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I told them to sit while I grabbed towels, hot water, anything to make them feel human again. Rebecca eased herself onto the couch carefully, as if expecting the cushions to betray her. The girls settled beside her, their shoulders touching hers, their movements slow and cautious, like children who had learned to make themselves small. I brought a basin of warm water and began gently wiping the soot from their faces. Nora blinked at me confused but trusting, as if my steady hands were the first safe thing she had seen in a long time. Lenny whimpered when the cloth brushed a scraped cheek, and Rebecca flinched with her as though the pain were shared. When I offered Rebecca the cloth, she held it for several seconds before finally beginning to clean her own skin. She winced each time her fingers encountered a bruise. For a moment, she seemed lost in her reflection in the darkened window ahead of her, as if wondering who that battered woman staring back might be. I heated canned soup on the stove. The girls devoured theirs fast, not greedy, but afraid the food might disappear if they set it down for too long. Rebecca sipped slowly, her eyes drifting toward the door every few seconds. She was listening for something, anything, and the silence of my property made her even more tense. After the dishes were cleared, I prepared the spare bedroom and laid out some old clothes that might fit her. The girls would share the bed while she slept in the recliner in the corner. When I told her she could take the bed and I would use the recliner instead, she shook her head sharply. I cannot sleep in a bed tonight. I did not ask why. Trauma settles in places the body does not always understand. She tucked the girls in herself. Nora curled on the left, Lenny on the right, their hands interlocked even as sleep began to claim them. Rebecca stood watching them for a long time, her arms wrapped around her torso like she was holding herself together. When we stepped onto the porch for a bit of air, the moon was high and silver, lighting the fields around the house in long, pale strokes. She hovered near the door, as if someone might leap from the darkness. I leaned against the rail, giving her space. After a moment, she whispered, "He will come for us." Her voice trembled not from cold, but from memory. I asked who he was, though I already suspected. She did not speak his name at first. Instead, she said, "He does not lose. He does not forgive. And if he sees us alive, he will start over." I waited. Silence stretched between us thick as the night. Finally, she said the name quietly, like speaking it aloud might summon him. Graham. I nodded as if the name meant something to me, though it did not, but the way her voice cracked around it told me everything I needed to know. She rubbed her hands together and kept looking toward the dirt road that vanished into the darkness. I had seen fear before. I had seen soldiers tremble when the ground shook under mortar fire. But the fear in her eyes was something different. It was not panic or shock. It was the kind that comes from living too long with a monster who smiles during the day and breaks you at night. Inside, the heater clicked on. The girls shifted in their sleep, a soft rustle of blankets through the wooden walls. Rebecca closed her eyes as though that gentle sound hurt her more than any siren or explosion ever could. She turned to me and whispered, "Thank you, Jake. I do not know why you stopped. I do not know why you stayed." I said the only thing that felt true. I stopped because I heard children scream. I stayed because I could not let them keep screaming. She did not cry. She simply nodded a small movement heavy with exhaustion. When she stepped back inside, I remained on the porch. The night wind moved across the fields, brushing the tall grass like fingertips through hair. I listened for engines, for voices, for anything that did not belong. The girls slept. Rebecca finally drifted into a restless doze. And fear, real fear, curled up on my porch like an unwelcome guest settling in for the night. Morning came quietly, the kind of slow gray dawn that slips over the hills without asking permission. I had barely slept. Every time the house shifted or the heater groaned, I sat up straight, listening for footsteps that did not belong. When I finally stepped into the hallway, the girls were already awake. Nora sat on the floor beside the bedroom door, hugging her knees, while Lenny traced patterns on the wooden boards with her fingertip. Both looked to me the moment I appeared, eyes wide and watchful, as if waiting for instructions on how to breathe. Their mother was in the kitchen, stiff and pale, holding a mug she was too tense to drink from. She glanced at me once, then turned toward the window again. I moved quietly, trying not to startle her, but she still flinched the moment the kettle clicked. I asked if she wanted breakfast. She said yes, though her eyes stayed fixed on the gravel road that curved past my farm. After a long moment, she whispered, "Do you ever feel someone watching even when you cannot see them?" I did not answer right away. One of my old combat buddies once said hypervigilance was not fear, but memory, the body remembering danger even when the mind wanted to pretend it was gone. Rebecca had that same look in her eyes. Every movement outside made her tense. Every shift of wind sounded like a threat. She ate only a few bites while the girls finished entire bowls of oatmeal. When Lenny reached for her hand, Rebecca jerked, then caught herself and forced a shaky smile for her daughter. I suggested we step outside for air. The sky was clear and bright. Dew sparkled on the fence line like scattered glass. For a moment, the world looked almost peaceful. Then an SUV rolled slowly down the distant road between two hills. It was too far away to make out the model, but close enough to send Rebecca straight back into the house, her breath sharp and shallow. I followed her, closing the door behind us. Her hands shook so violently she could not hold onto a chair. I waited for her to speak. It took almost a full minute before she said softly, "That was one of his." I asked who she meant. She swallowed hard, jaw tightening. "My husband, the father of my girls. His name is Graham Hale." I had heard the last name before. Hale was attached to half a dozen charities, 2 research centers, and a political action committee that plastered smiling faces on every campaign billboard from here to the state line. He was a philanthropist, a venture investor, a man who owned more land and more influence than most small towns combined. But the way she said his name made every polished reputation I had ever heard feel like a mask someone else had built for him. She pulled her sleeves down, and for the first time I noticed faint yellow bruises along her forearm. Old ones. "He changed after Nora was born," she said. "At least, that is the story I used to tell myself. Small corrections at first. Do not wear that. Do not speak to them. Do not go out without telling me." Every year the leash shortened. Every apology sounded more rehearsed. I taught myself to accept it because I thought it protected the girls. Her voice cracked on the last word. She looked toward the bedroom where they were playing with a battered stuffed bear they had rescued from the wreck. When they got old enough to understand whispers, he moved the punishment behind closed doors. They learned to hide. I learned to lie. Her breath hitched as she rubbed her temples with trembling fingers. The police sided with him. Child Services said the reports were exaggerated. His family owns half the county. His friends own the rest. I could hear the bitterness in her voice, but beneath it, there was something else. Grief. Numb and exhausted. I asked what happened the night of the crash. She closed her eyes, gathering strength, then said, "I was packing bags for the girls while he was on a business trip. I had the paperwork for a restraining order filed in a different district. I thought I had a day or 2. She swallowed. "He came home early." She described the fight with a flatness that felt practiced, as though she had told the story many times in her own head, but never aloud. "He shoved me against the counter, said he would not let me embarrass him, said I should be grateful he had not replaced me yet." She paused, gripping the edge of the chair to steady herself. Then his voice changed. all softness gone. He said, "If you try to leave, you will not make it out alive." I took the girls to the car that night, drove until the sun set. When the brake light came on, I thought it was just the engine. Then I smelled gasoline. Then I saw the fire. She stared into space, remembering. "I did not understand until you pulled me out. The belt had been cut." That is when I knew. He intended for all of us to die. My stomach tightened. The memory of that clean, sharp cut flashed through my mind. Someone who wanted chaos to look like an accident. I asked why he would chase her if he wanted her dead. She gave a hollow laugh. "Because he likes control more than winning. He cannot stand that I slipped through his fingers. Death was plan A. Reclaiming us is plan B. Either way, he gets to decide the ending." Her eyes met mine then, dark, haunted, and full of a fear that felt too heavy for one person to hold. I told her she was safe here. The words came out steady, but I knew they were a promise I was not sure I could keep. She shook her head. "You do not understand. He has people, money, influence. He once made a detective disappear from a case file. He once made a hospital change its report. If he thinks we are here, he will not come alone." My pulse thudded hard, not from fear, but from determination. I had lost my son without a single chance to fight for him. I was not about to let another family be erased in front of me. A faint clatter came from the porch then. I walked to the window, only a bird tapping at the rail. But Rebecca stiffened behind me as if expecting Graham himself to rise from the earth. I turned back to her. "Whoever this man is, he will not touch you or the girls while you are on my land." She stared at me for a long moment as though weighing whether to believe that anyone could stand between her and the life she had fled. Then she whispered the truth she had been circling since the moment I met her. "If he finds us, there will be no place left to run." The morning after Rebecca told me who she was running from felt strangely calm, like the world was holding its breath without warning us why. The girls helped me feed the chickens while Rebecca washed dishes in the kitchen, her movements slow and mechanical. I kept scanning the tree line for headlights or silhouettes, but nothing stirred beyond the usual deer trails. For a brief moment, I imagined maybe we had a little time. A pocket of quiet before the storm. I should have known better. It started with a vibration in my pocket. My phone buzzed with a notification alert from a local news app. I opened it without thinking, expecting wildfires or road closures. Instead, I saw a headline that made my jaw tighten. "Prominent philanthropist pleads for public assistance in locating missing wife and daughters." Beneath it was a picture of Graham Hale standing behind a podium wearing a somber expression sculpted for the cameras. He looked devastated, concerned, even noble. His voice came through the short clip attached. "My family vanished without a trace. If anyone has information, please help bring them home." Rebecca's name flashed across the screen. So did the girls. My stomach turned cold. I shut off the phone quickly and scanned the yard. The girls were still playing with the chickens, chasing feathers and giggling like children who barely remembered smoke and flame from the night before. I walked to the porch where Rebecca was folding towels and asked her to step inside. When she saw the screenshot on my phone, her whole body stiffened. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "He is faster than I expected," she whispered. "He is already building his story, and the public will believe him because they always have." I tried to reassure her, but before I could finish, another notification popped up, then another, and another. The story was spreading instantly. He had money connections influence. Newsrooms would bend over backwards to run whatever he fed them, and people were eating it up. Comments flooded in. "What kind of mother disappears with her kids? Poor man. Someone help him." I put the phone away before she saw more. But the poison was already out there, and I knew what it meant. People were looking for her, thinking they were helping a grieving husband. Even worse, some would not look closely before calling in a tip. As if to prove that thought, a chicken clucked loudly and flapped its wings. The girls screamed not from fear of Graham, but fear of the sound. Rebecca rushed to them instinctively while I walked the perimeter of the yard. That was when I saw it. A cat video, a harmless one. Nora had filmed the barn cat earlier that morning and posted it to some app I barely recognized. The clip was only 5 seconds long. but the geotag was active. It pinpointed our location within 30 feet. My phone buzzed again, this time with a direct message from someone I had not heard from in years. "Jake, is everything okay at your place? Saw something odd." The message was vague enough not to panic me, but specific enough to warn me someone had noticed. I snatched the girl's tablet from the porch table and disabled the account before the video spread further. But in the few minutes it had been online, it might have already been seen or copied or saved. The internet is a wildfire. Once the spark hits the wrong patch of dry grass, it takes on a life of its own. Rebecca saw my face as I returned inside. "What happened?" I told her about the video. Her lips parted in fear. Her knees buckled and she grabbed the counter to stay upright. "He has people who do nothing except monitor social feeds. He will know the region now, maybe even the mile." She paced in tight circles, her breathing sharpened. "We have to go. We cannot stay here." It was the first time she tried to run from my farm, and the first time I knew we could not. Running blind would only expose us more. He had resources we did not. He had eyes everywhere. But I had knowledge of my own land, knowledge he did not. I knelt in front of her. "If we leave without a plan, he wins. You told me he wants you found, so the best way to beat him is to make sure he cannot approach without us knowing first." I spoke calmly, though my heart was pounding like fists in my chest. I walked the property, checking every entrance, every fence line. I chained the back gate and set motion lights near the barn. I covered the truck with an old tarp and branches. I triple-locked the house and moved the girls' sleeping area farther from the windows. Rebecca watched everything, silent but desperate for reassurance. The sheriff's office was one of my last stops. I drove there only after the girls were asleep. The building was small, old, and smelled like stale coffee. Sheriff Miller sat behind the desk reading something with a half-bored expression. I explained the crash, the cut seatbelt, the domestic abuse, the restraining order attempt, Graham's wealth, his manipulation of the system. I told him everything. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Jake, you are talking about one of the most respected men in this county. You sure you are not exaggerating what the wife told you?" The words hit me harder than they should have. "Sheriff, the belt was cut. The car was on fire. The girls were screaming." He shrugged like the truth was negotiable. "Could have been a manufacturing defect. Happens more than people think." I stared at him, stunned. "She needs protection." He sighed as though annoyed. "Look, if Graham contacts us, we will ask him to leave her alone. But we cannot accuse a man like that without more than her word." My fists clenched at my sides. More than her word. Her bruises, the cut belt, the terror in her eyes. None of that counted. The system bent for the powerful and broke for the powerless. I left without saying another word. When I returned home, the house was dark except for a single lamp glowing in the living room. Rebecca was sitting on the couch with the girls asleep beside her. She looked up at me with a hollow expression I had seen only in people who believed the world had already decided their fate. I locked the door behind me and sat down across from her. The weight of the day settled over us like a storm cloud ready to burst. She whispered, "He knows I am alive. He knows I have the girls. And now he will hunt us down." I reached for the lamp switch and shut it off. Darkness settled in, but it felt safer that way. I spoke quietly so the girls would not wake. "Then we will make sure he cannot find you." Even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if I truly could protect them. Yet one thing was absolutely clear. The internet had betrayed us in a matter of minutes, and somewhere in the dark, Graham Hale was watching the world for signs of his missing family, signs that might already be pointing straight to my farm. Morning light spilled across the old wood floors like it had been waiting there all night for someone to notice it, and for the first time since the crash, I felt the house breathe with something gentler than fear. The girls padded into the kitchen in their socks, hair-messy cheeks flushed from sleep, and it struck me how quickly children cling to whatever softness they can find. Nora climbed onto a stool and asked if she could help whisk eggs while little Lenny sat on the counter swinging her legs, tapping out a rhythm only she understood. Rebecca entered last. She moved carefully like her bones remembered too many nights of walking on eggshells. Her eyes carried exhaustion, but there was something else there too. A flicker. A tiny ember of safety she did not know how to trust yet. As I cooked breakfast, the girls began giggling about how the barn cat had snuck into the laundry basket again. Their laughter filled the kitchen with a sound I had not heard inside these walls since my son Adam was alive. It hit me unexpectedly, a sharp ache mixed with warmth. I tried to hide that reaction, but Rebecca noticed. She studied me with quiet understanding, the kind born from her own buried grief. We ate together at the small table. The girls told stories about coloring shapes in the fog on the windows and insisted the pancakes tasted better because the chickens outside had approved the eggs first. Rebecca apologized every few minutes for taking up space, for asking for syrup, for breathing too loudly. I finally set my fork down and told her gently she did not need permission to exist here. She nodded, but her shoulders remained tight like she was bracing for something she thought was inevitable. After breakfast, the girls begged to help in the garden. I handed them small gloves and watched as they ran ahead of us, their feet skimming dew from the grass. Rebecca walked beside me with hesitation, at first, keeping a careful distance, as though unsure whether she was allowed to walk next to someone without being punished for it. I pretended not to notice and talked about the tomatoes that needed pruning, the weather that might bring frost, the goats that liked to escape if the latch was loose. Slowly, her arms uncrossed. Slowly, she exhaled. The girls shrieked with laughter when a chicken strutted across the yard, chasing its own shadow. The softness of that moment nearly cracked me open. Rebecca crouched beside them, showing them how to loosen soil around the carrots. Sunlight caught in her hair, and for a second she looked nothing like the terrified woman who had fallen out of a burning van, and everything like a mother who deserved an ordinary life. Nora tugged on my sleeve and asked, her voice hushed, whether this farm was safe. It was the exact question my son used to ask when thunderstorms rattled the roof. I swallowed hard before answering. "As long as you are here," I said, "I will do everything in my power to make sure it is." She nodded with trust so pure it made something inside me fracture. Rebecca looked at me, then really looked, and I knew she heard the things I did not say. The girls wandered toward the chicken coop while Rebecca stood beside me beneath the shade of the oak tree. She wiped dirt from her hands and spoke softly. "They slept through the night," she said. "They have not done that in years." I nodded, trying not to let her see how much that meant. She hesitated before continuing. "I do not know how to let myself feel relief. Every time I breathe, I worry he will take it away. Trauma makes people apologize for breathing." I wanted to tell her she did not have to live like that anymore, but I was not sure I had earned the right to say it yet. Instead, I fixed a loose hinge on the coop door while she brushed dust from her jeans. The day unfolded in slow, gentle waves. We fixed a section of the fence that had started to lean. The girls pretended the goats were dragons guarding treasure. Rebecca laughed once, soft and startled, as though the sound had escaped her before she could pull it back. She caught herself, covered her mouth, and then lowered her hand slowly when she saw neither judgment nor punishment coming her way. By late afternoon, clouds gathered low and gray, wrapping the farm in a quiet hush. The girls curled on the couch with blankets while Rebecca helped me patch a rip in the screen door. The house felt different now. Not like a hiding place. Not like a battlefield. More like a place where a family might learn how to exist again. But the moment that sealed it was small and unexpected. After dinner, as I cleaned the kitchen, I found a drawing on the table. It was hastily scribbled in crayon, a tall figure standing beneath a wooden roof with two smaller figures holding each hand. The sun overhead was big and smiling. At the bottom were 3 shaky words written in a child's careful print. "We feel safe." My throat tightened. I set the drawing down slowly, almost reverently. When I turned, Rebecca was standing behind me. She had seen the drawing, too. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "They have not drawn anything like that in a long time." Her eyes glistened with gratitude and fear tangled together. I almost reached for her hand, but stopped myself. I did not want to move too fast. I did not want to push her into anything she was not ready for. Instead, I said quietly, "Then we keep them safe." She nodded and exhaled shakily, as though letting go of a weight she did not realize she carried. Later that night, the girls fell asleep on the couch while we sat on the porch. She handed me a mug of tea without speaking. I accepted it, neither of us needing to fill the air with explanations. For the first time since the fire, since the crash, since the nightmares that shaped her life, she did not look like someone preparing to run. And for the first time since losing my son, I did not feel entirely alone. I thought we saved them from the flames that night, but as I watched them breathe peacefully inside my home, I realized they were the ones pulling me out of a fire I had been living in for years. The evening settled in with a kind of stillness that made every sound sharper than it needed to be. The girls had spent the day running through the fields until their cheeks turned the color of late summer apples, and now they were sprawled on the living room rug, whispering stories to each other while Rebecca folded laundry at the table. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing soil from my hands after fixing a loose fence post, when something at the edge of my vision made the hair on my arms rise. A shape. Still. Too still. I turned fully toward the window. A figure stood by the far fence line, not moving, not waving, not calling out, just watching. The last glow of daylight painted him in a muted silhouette, long shoulders, a stance too controlled, like someone who had spent years learning how to intimidate without lifting a finger. My breath thinned. I stepped closer to the window, wiping the condensation with the side of my hand. The figure did not flinch. Then, with the same calm precision that made my skin crawl, he stepped back into the tree line and disappeared. I walked into the living room, trying not to let the unease in my voice carry to the children. "Are the girls okay?" I asked. Rebecca looked up, sensing everything I did not say. "They are fine." "Why? What is wrong?" Nora glanced up from her drawing, and Lenny paused mid-sentence. Before I could gather my words, Nora spoke in a whisper. "He was here again." My heart dropped. Again. She nodded and pointed to the window with a small, trembling hand. "The tall man. He was by the fence before dinner. I did not want to tell you because I did not want Mommy to cry." Rebecca froze. The color drained from her face. She stood up so quickly the laundry basket toppled over. She walked to the window with a speed that belonged to someone whose fear lived deep in her bones. Her hands gripped the wooden frame as she stared into the fading dusk. She whispered one word, barely audible, but sharp enough to slice the room in two. "Graham." A chill ran down my spine. I had never met the man, but the weight of his name carried the shadow of every bruise she tried to hide, every tremor in her daughter's voices, every sleepless night that had carved hollows in her cheeks. I stepped beside her and lowered my voice. "Are you certain?" She nodded once. "Firm. Absolute. I would know the way he stands anywhere." Her hands shook so violently I placed mine over hers to steady them. For a moment, she leaned into my touch out of pure survival instinct. Then she pulled back, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Her breathing came shallow and quick. She whispered, "He is not supposed to be anywhere near us. He is violating every condition." She stopped herself biting her lip, realizing the girls were still in the room. I told them to go get their pajamas, and as they padded down the hallway, I reached for the phone. I dialed the sheriff's office, keeping my voice steady. "This is Jake Carter. I have a man trespassing on my property. A dangerous one." The sheriff sounded bored, as though I had interrupted his evening coffee. "Did he threaten you?" I clenched my jaw. "He is stalking a woman under my roof. Her estranged husband. She fears for her life." The sheriff sighed. "A domestic dispute. Those get messy. If he did not break into the home or cause property damage, there is not much we can do. Report it in the morning." I stared at the phone in disbelief. He was here 20 minutes ago. He is a threat. The sheriff raised his voice slightly. "And I am telling you, there is no cause for response. Not unless someone is hurt." My grip tightened. "So, we have to wait until he kills someone." Silence. Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. Rebecca stared at me, searching my face for hope, and finding none. "They will not help us," she whispered. "They never have." She moved to the couch, sinking into the cushions like her body could no longer hold its own weight. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly, a habit she probably learned long before tonight. I sat across from her, giving her space, but refusing to let her slip back into the despair that had ruled her life for years. "Rebecca," I need you to tell me everything, not just the pieces, not just the parts you think I can handle. I need the truth." Her eyes lifted slowly. They were glassy hollow, filled with the echoes of years she had been forced to survive. She stared at the window again, her voice barely a breath. "He used to put his hand around my throat when the girls cried too loudly. He said he needed to teach us silence." My stomach twisted. She continued, voice cracking. "When Nora hid under the bed, he dragged her out by her ankle. When Lenny spilled juice, he locked her in the pantry until she begged for forgiveness. I covered the bruises with makeup, told the girls to pretend it was okay." Her hands shook violently as she wiped tears she did not want to shed. "I tried to leave. Twice. The second time, he held my face against the counter and told me no one would believe me, that he was too important, too respected. He told me he would ruin my life until I crawled back. My fists tightened until the leather of the chair creaked. Everything in me wanted to march into the darkness with nothing but my bare hands. But I stayed still, because survival required a clear mind. I asked quietly, 'Did he cut the brake line?' She swallowed hard. Yes. He wanted it to look like an accident. He wanted custody after. He wanted to be the only one they had." The fire from that confession lit something raw inside me. I stood staring out the same window where the shadow had watched us. I did not see him anymore, but I could feel him, like a stain on the dark. The girls returned in their pajamas, clutching their stuffed toys. I tucked them into the spare bedroom and sat with them until their breathing steadied. When I stepped back into the hall, Rebecca stood there waiting for me with a terror so deep it hollowed her voice. "He will not stop Jake. He will come back, and next time he will not stand by the fence." I placed a hand on the doorframe to steady myself. Then I said the truth I knew she needed to hear. "Rebecca, he found you once. He will find you again, but he will not take you from here. Not while I am alive." Morning touched the fields with a quiet gold, the kind that usually made the world feel safe, softer, almost gentle. But on that particular morning, the silence felt wrong, as if the land itself was holding its breath. I was standing on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching steam drift into the crisp air when the first tremor hit beneath my boots. A low vibration rolled through the ground like distant thunder. I frowned, leaning forward, scanning the tree line. Another tremor followed stronger. The chickens erupted into frantic clucking. The horses in the back pasture began pacing, snorting their instincts, picking up danger long before the human mind could place it. I set the mug down slowly. That's when the sound cut through the air, the chopping of blades slicing the sky. One helicopter at first, then a second, then a third. They rose over the ridge in tight formation, black bodies glinting in the morning sun, moving with purpose. Not news choppers, not emergency services. These were the sleek, expensive models you only ever saw on political campaigns or in military recruiting videos. My stomach tightened. Rebecca stepped onto the porch behind me, rubbing her arms against the cold. She followed my gaze upward and her whole body went rigid. Her voice cracked. "Jake! Jake, it's him!" The helicopters descended lower wind, blasting across the fields, bending the tall grass in circular waves. Dust and hay whipped into our faces. I grabbed Rebecca's arm and pulled her toward the doorway. "Get inside! Get the girls! Now!" She ran back in, calling for Nora and Lenny with a panic so familiar it cut me. I sprinted into the yard as the first helicopter dipped toward the clearing behind the barn, kicking up a violent storm of dirt. The second hovered above the field. The third drifted toward the driveway as if blocking every exit. Men in black suits stepped out before the skids even settled. Not military, not police, private security, well-trained, expensive, efficient. One of them approached with quick, controlled strides, holding a thick envelope. He shouted over the roar, "We have a lawful court order. You are harboring minors unlawfully removed from their custodial guardian." I yelled back, "That's a lie and you know it." The man did not even blink. "Please comply or we will forcibly ensure the children's safety." Rebecca burst out the front door with both girls clinging to her legs, their eyes wide with terror. Nora screamed when she saw the men. Lenny tried to run back inside, but one of the suits broke formation and moved toward them. Fast! Too fast! I charged forward, shoving the man back with my shoulder. He stumbled, surprised, but not hurt. "Do not touch them!" He straightened, assessing me with cold calculation. "Unauthorized physical interference will be met with countermeasures." That was the only warning he gave before another man came at me from behind, twisting my arm in a control hold that sent pain shooting through my shoulder. Two more swept past me, moving toward Rebecca. The girls shrieked. Rebecca fought like a cornered animal, kicking, screaming, clawing, but they overpowered her easily. One man grabbed Nora's wrist, another lifted Lenny despite her frantic kicking. Rebecca screamed their names until her voice tore. I roared, breaking free long enough to swing at the nearest man. My fist connected. He staggered. But then another blow hit me from the side, and I dropped to my knees as a boot pressed against my back, holding me down. Dust filled my mouth. I lifted my head just in time to see Rebecca being pulled toward the helicopter, her legs dragging through the dirt as she dug her heels in desperately. "Let me go! Let my daughters go! Please, please!" The girls reached for her hands, stretching through the chaos. "Mommy! Mommy!" The sound carved through me. My chest felt like it was splitting open. I tried to stand again, but the boot drove harder into my spine. A guard leaned down and hissed into my ear. "You cannot protect them. Not from him." The world spun with rage, with helplessness, with a grief I thought I had buried with my own child. Rebecca was hauled into the first helicopter. The girls were shoved in after her. Nora beat her fists against the window. Lenny screamed my name. "Jake! Jake! Do not let them take us!" The doors slammed shut. The blades accelerated. Wind blasted the field, knocking over buckets, scattering tools, rattling the fence posts. I pushed myself halfway up, despite the boot crushing my back, my muscles straining until they felt ready to tear. Rebecca pressed her palms against the glass. Tears streaked her face. She mouthed something I could barely read. "Please, please." The helicopter lifted off. I stumbled forward, falling into the dirt as the machines rose higher, their shadows sweeping across the farm like dark wings. They veered east toward the mountains. Within seconds, the sky swallowed them. The wind settled. The chickens quieted. The dust drifted to the ground. Silence closed in. A silence so complete it felt like a verdict. I stayed on my knees long after the last echo faded. My hands dug into the soil. My breath scraped through my throat. The front door of the house hung open. A chair was knocked over on the porch. One of Lenny's small shoes lay abandoned near the steps. The farm, once loud with life, felt hollow. I rose slowly, my body shaking with exhaustion, and something darker, something sharper. I walked into the house like a man moving through a dream. Rebecca's scarf was still draped over the back of the couch. The girls' drawings were scattered on the floor where they had dropped them in the rush. My reflection in the window was barely human. Dirt, blood, rage. But beneath all of it, a vow was forming. Clear, unbreakable. He took them because he thinks no one will fight him. He thinks the world belongs to men like him. He thinks fear is a cage that will hold anyone he chooses. My jaw clenched. My fists curled. Not this time. Not this family. I stepped back outside the wind, brushing cool across my face as if steadying me. Then I said it aloud, voice low but certain, the kind of certainty that changes the course of a life. I lost one family already. I am not losing another. The farm felt colder after they were taken, like the air itself had thinned. I paced through the workshop long after the helicopters vanished, touching tools without seeing them opening drawers. I did not need replaying every second I had failed to stop those men. The girls' laughter still hung in the corners of the house, echoes refusing to fade. Rebecca's scarf was draped over the back of a chair. Lenny's crayon lay near the door, where she must have dropped it while reaching for her mother. The silence pressed against my ears until it hummed. I did not know what to do next. All I knew was I could not stay still. I grabbed my keys, climbed into the truck, and drove without a destination until the road led me toward town, toward someone who owed me nothing but who might understand what kind of monster we were up against. Tom answered the door before I could knock twice. His eyes swept over the bruises on my arms, the dirt still on my clothes, the look that must have been carved into my face. He stepped aside without a word. Inside his living room, boxes of old case files and veteran support pamphlets sat stacked along the walls. He gestured for me to sit, but I remained standing. "They took them," I said. "Private security, 3 helicopters. Court order my ass?" His jaw tightened. The name Graham Hale. That was the first time I saw Tom hesitate. He ran a hand over his bald head and exhaled slowly. "Jake, that man has more money, influence, and political leverage than most governors. He funds campaigns. He donates to judges. He sits on charity boards to keep his image polished. If he wants someone disappeared, he rarely leaves fingerprints." I stepped forward. "Then we need proof. Real proof. Something big enough no one can ignore." Tom studied me quietly. His eyes softened, sensing the storm inside me. "You cannot take him head-on, Jake. You will not win a direct fight. I am not asking to fight him. I just want them back." He motioned toward the boxes. Domestic abuse cases lined his shelves, stories of women, unheard children, dismissed men like Graham protected by money and polished reputations. Tom rubbed his temples and finally said, "There have been rumors about him for years. Hidden settlements, intimidation. Several missing reports filed and withdrawn, but nothing stuck. No one dared testify. I told him about the brake line, the initial cut on the seatbelt, the shadow by the fence the night Rebecca begged me to believe her. I told him about the girls' terror about the explosion I had pulled them from. Tom listened with the patience of a man who had heard too many true horrors. Then he leaned back and said, "If what you are telling me is accurate, we can build a case. Not just domestic abuse. Conspiracy, attempted murder, kidnapping, unlawful detainment. But without video evidence, no judge will touch Graham." He paused, eyes narrowing. "Unless you get something from inside his property." My stomach clenched. "His property? You mean wherever he is keeping them now?" Tom nodded. "He has several hidden residences, remote, heavily guarded, but one in particular keeps showing up in complaints. A private lodge deep in the mountains. It is off-grid, but equipped with surveillance panic rooms and a network of guards trained to keep journalists away." I asked the only question that mattered. "Do you know where it is?" Tom pulled out an old notebook, flipping through pages covered in maps and notes from investigations long shut down. He pointed to a marked location near the ridgeline. "Graham uses that lodge for anything he wants off the record. If he took them quickly and quietly, that is where he will hide them." My adrenaline surged. "Then that is where I am going." Tom grabbed my arm before I could step out the door. "Jake, listen to me. That place is not a farmhouse. You cannot walk in. You cannot break down the door. You need intelligence timing and a way to get them out without triggering an armed response." I pulled away. "I do not care. I will crawl through the dirt if I have to." Tom studied my face for a long moment before speaking again. "Rebecca and the girls matter to you." I nodded. "Yes, more than you know." Tom sighed heavily, then opened another file. It contained a printed report, a photo of Graham and an affidavit from one of his former drivers. The details made my blood boil. The driver's statement included mentions of sudden trips to the lodge nights when Graham arrived with unexplained injuries on his hands, times when screaming echoed through the hallways, but guards were instructed to stay outside. Tom tapped the page. "If we can find someone inside his circle who is ready to turn on him, this case explodes." He paced, thinking aloud. "Not a guard. They are too loyal or too afraid. But maybe a housekeeper, a groundskeeper, someone who sees more than they are supposed to, someone overlooked." Then Tom looked at me with a seriousness that froze the room. "We need footage, a confession, something undeniable, and we need witnesses willing to testify." I felt the weight of what he was asking, but then I remembered Lenny reaching for me as she was dragged into the helicopter, Nora pounding her tiny fists against the window, Rebecca's voice breaking as she screamed my name. I swallowed hard. "Tell me what I have to do." Tom leaned in. "First, we track flight paths. Private helicopters always file something, even if minimal. Second, we find any ex-employees of Graham who got out before he silenced them. Third, we prepare for the fact that when you go after a man like Graham, he will come for you, too." I smirked bitterly. He already did. Tom placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Then you are already past the point of no return. He went to his computer and began pulling up databases. He searched aviation logs, corporate travel routes, land ownership registries. Everything pointed to the same location, a remote lodge set 5 miles off the main road, surrounded by forest and patrolled by private teams. I stared at the map glowing on the screen, pulse heavy in my ears. That is where they are. Tom nodded. Yes, and if you go alone, you might die. If I do nothing, 3 people I care about will keep suffering. He exhaled sharply. Then we do this together. But Jake, understand one thing. This is not just a rescue. This is a war against a powerful man. And once we begin, we cannot stop until he is destroyed. I looked him in the eye. Good, because I am done watching monsters walk free. Night fell earlier in the mountains than it did on the farm. By the time Tom and I reached the old service road branching off the highway, the sky had already deepened into a heavy indigo thick with clouds that swallowed the moon. The lodge was somewhere ahead, hidden behind miles of forest money and fear. We killed the headlights and let the truck crawl forward with only the faint glow of the dashboard lighting our faces. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say that would make this safer or smarter or even survivable, but doing nothing was no longer an option. I had seen too many children lose their light to monsters who hid behind power. I was not letting 3 more slip into that darkness. When the trees grew too dense for the truck, we parked behind a fallen log and continued on foot. The night was cold enough to sting my lungs. Every twig snap under my boots felt like a firecracker in the quiet. Tom walked ahead with the confidence of someone who had tracked dangerous men before. We moved toward the ridge where a faint hum vibrated the air. Generators. Big ones. I tightened my grip on the small pack slung over my shoulder. Rope, a flashlight, wire cutters. A crowbar I had used on a dozen engines and now carried like a promise. As we crested the ridge, the lodge came into view below us. Low stone walls, dark wooden beams, expensive but built to intimidate, not invite. Security lights cast bright circles across the yard. 2 men patrolled near the main entrance, their posture rigid, their eyes sharp. Private guards, exactly as Tom warned. I whispered, "How do we get in?" Tom pointed toward the back of the property where the shadow of a metal structure rose behind the lodge. Maintenance access. Most are built the same. There is almost always a service duct to keep the mechanical systems running. I stared at the distance. That is a long way from safe. Tom smirked. Safety left the moment you stepped out of the truck. We slipped through the trees until we reached the rear fence. Tom crouched checking for tripwires or motion sensors. Nothing visible. Graham's arrogance was showing. He believed the world too afraid to approach him, too blind to look behind the curtains he pulled shut. We cut through a section of fencing already weak with rust. The service building was smaller up close, almost swallowed by the darkness, a square metal structure with a single padlocked door. I used the crowbar on the hinge until it groaned loose. Inside, the air was thick with machine heat. Pipes lined the narrow walls. Large ducts snaked upward into the lodge. I pointed to one wide enough to crawl through. That goes inside. Tom hesitated. You are sure you can handle this? The metal will be hot, tight spaces. One wrong move and you drop into a room you cannot get out of. I met his eyes. I have worked inside engines my whole life. I can handle tight. He nodded, then handed me a small flashlight. Once you are in, stay low and slow. Look for vents that open into hallways. And Jake, if you find them, grab them and leave. Do not play hero. Heroes get people killed. I swallowed hard. I just want them safe. That is all. I climbed into the duct, the heat radiating through the metal walls like a giant exhaling. My shoulders scraped the sides. Each movement echoed softly, so I controlled every breath, every inch, praying no one below heard me. The duct bent, left, then rose sharply. I braced my boots against the sides and climbed muscles burning palms, slick with sweat despite the cold. A faint light shone through a vent ahead. Voices drifted upward. 2 guards. Their tones casual, bored. One complained about working nights. The other laughed about the bonus Graham promised if this family situation stayed quiet. My jaw tightened. They were treating Rebecca's terror, the girl's fear, as a casual inconvenience. I waited until their voices faded, then continued upward until I reached another vent. This one opened into a hallway lined with framed paintings and thick rugs. Despite the luxury, the place felt sterile, like a museum curated by someone who had forgotten how human beings lived. I listened. Silence. I pushed the grate gently until it loosened and slipped into the hallway, my boots landing soundlessly on the rug. Every instinct screamed to run, but I forced myself to move with control. At the end of the hall, I heard something. Soft, rhythmic, a child's trembling breath. My heart lurched. I followed the sound to a door slightly ajar. Inside, dim lamplight glowed over two small beds. Nora sat upright, hugging her knees, her hair sticking to her damp cheeks. Lenny lay curled under a blanket, clutching her stuffed animal so tightly it looked painful. When Nora saw me, her eyes widened, then overflowed. "Jake," she whispered. "You came." I crossed the room in 3 steps and knelt beside her. "Of course I came. I promised you, remember?" Lenny stirred, then scrambled into my arms, pressing her face into my chest. I felt the tremors in her small body. "Where is your mom?" I whispered. Nora pointed to the end of the hall. "He locked her in the room with the cameras. He said she has to learn." The air in my lungs turned to fire. I gathered both girls close and whispered, "You are safe. You stay with my friend Tom outside. I will get your mother." Nora nodded bravely, though her lips shook. Lenny clung tighter. I carried them back to the duct access near the hall's end, just as Tom slipped inside from the shadows. His eyes widened with relief. "Good. You found them." I handed the girls to him. "Take them to the truck. Keep low. Guard the way out. I will get Rebecca." Tom hesitated. "Jake, be smart." "I will, but I could not leave Rebecca in this place one moment longer." I moved down the hall toward the last door where a faint light glowed beneath the frame. I heard breathing, shallow, strained. I opened the door slowly. Rebecca sat on the floor, her back against the wall wrists, bound a bruise forming on her cheek. When she saw me, her eyes filled with disbelief. "Jake!" Her voice cracked on my name. I dropped to my knees and cut the restraints with shaking hands. She fell forward into me, her fingers gripping my shirt like she feared I might vanish. "We have to go," I whispered. "Now!" But before we could stand, an alarm blared overhead loud enough to vibrate the floor. Red lights flashed. I pulled Rebecca to her feet. "Run!" We sprinted down the hall as shouts erupted behind us. Doors slammed. Boots thundered. A guard appeared at the corner. I grabbed a metal vase from a side table and hurled it with everything inside me. It struck his temple. Not enough to kill, just enough to drop him. We raced toward the service duct. Tom's voice echoed from ahead. "Move! Jake, move!" Rebecca climbed into the duct first. I pushed her upward, then followed as guards rounded the hall behind us, shouting and raising weapons. A bullet ricocheted off the metal with a deafening ping. We crawled fast, the duct rattling around us. When we reached the service shed, Tom pulled Rebecca out while I slipped through behind her, landing hard on my shoulder. We burst into the trees as guards poured out of the lodge behind us. Headlights snapped on, engines roared. Graham's SUV shot toward the woods like a predator lunging after prey. Tom grabbed my arm. "Run!" We ran into the night, the forest swallowing us, the sound of engines chasing us through the dark. The forest swallowed us whole as soon as we broke into a run. Branches snapping back against our shoulders, roots clawing at our boots, the darkness thick enough to blur the line between fear and instinct. Tom led with the girls, Rebecca close behind him while I stayed at the rear, turning back every few steps to watch the beam of headlights slicing through the trees like a predator's gaze. The sound of the engine grew louder, angrier, as Graham's SUV barreled off the lodge driveway and crashed through the underbrush with a recklessness that made it clear he did not care who he hurt getting to us. Rebecca stumbled once on a fallen branch, and I caught her before she hit the ground. She gasped, breath short and sharp. "Jake, he is not going to stop." I met her eyes for a fraction of a heartbeat. "Then we make him stop." Tom hissed from ahead. "This way." A narrow trail, barely visible, cut across the ridge and led deeper into the woods. I recognized it. Years ago, I had walked it with my son when we used to explore the mountains for old logging routes. The memory hit me like a hot iron to the ribs, but I pushed it aside. Now was not the time for ghosts. The headlights behind us swerved violently, bouncing as the SUV crushed small saplings under its tires. Graham was not driving carefully. He was driving with fury, with obsession, with the certainty that he could run us down like animals. The trail opened into a clearing and my stomach dropped. Ahead of us was the old wooden bridge, stretched across a ravine carved deep by spring runoff. I knew the bridge well, knew every board, every nail, every weak place that had been rotting for years. I had warned the Forestry Service to close it, but nothing was ever done. It was dangerous now, barely held by rusted bolts and memories. Tom stopped abruptly, turning toward me. "Jake, the kids cannot cross that. The whole thing might collapse under one person, let alone all of us together." I knelt beside Nora and Lenny, who clung to each other, wide-eyed, trembling. "Listen to me, both of you. You hold Tom's hands. You stay light on your feet. Do not stop until you reach the other side." They nodded with the terrified obedience of children who knew fear too well. Tom guided them onto the first plank, testing the wood. It groaned, but held. Rebecca started to follow, but then the forest behind us exploded with light as Graham's SUV burst through the trees, its front bumper tearing small branches apart. The engine roared like something feral. Rebecca froze, her breath hitched. "It is him! It is him!" I stepped in front of her. "Go! Now!" She shook her head violently. "I cannot leave you. You are not leaving me. You are crossing first." She hesitated only a second longer before grabbing the railing and stepping onto the bridge. Boards shifted beneath her weight, sending dust drifting into the ravine. I backed onto the first plank, facing the oncoming vehicle. Graham slammed the gas, sending the SUV skidding sideways in the dirt before realigning with the bridge. His headlights locked on me, burning white into my eyes. I raised both hands and shouted, "Graham, stop! The bridge will not hold your vehicle! Stop now!" My voice echoed through the ravine. For a split second, the SUV slowed. I thought maybe, just maybe, he would listen. Instead, he leaned out the window, his face a twisted snarl. "She is mine. They are mine. And you are nothing." He floored the accelerator. The tires spun, kicking up shards of rock. The SUV lunged forward. I sprinted backward onto the bridge, the planks groaning under my boots. Tom and the girls had already reached the far side. Rebecca was only halfway across, gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Jake!" Her voice cracked with terror. I glanced behind me. The SUV's front wheels hit the first boards. A thunderous crack split the night. The structure shuddered violently. Nails shot free like sparks. The entire bridge dipped, then sagged. Rebecca screamed. Tom yelled for her to move. The SUV lurched another few feet before the front end crashed through the weakened planks. Wood splintered. Bolts tore loose. The entire front half of the vehicle plunged downward into the ravine, suspended only by the rear axle. Graham's face smashed against the windshield. He pounded the glass, stunned, disoriented. Then gravity won. The rear wheels lifted. The SUV tilted forward and fell nose first into the rushing water below. The sound was enormous, a metal beast swallowed by the earth. A wave of cold mist shot upward as the vehicle disappeared beneath the churning current. Rebecca reached the far side. I grabbed her hand just as the final section of the bridge gave way beneath my feet. For a heartbeat, I dangled over the ravine legs, swinging above the void. Rebecca screamed my name as she and Tom pulled with everything they had. My boots found the dirt. My knees hit the ground hard. I lay there panting, staring into the darkness below. The SUV bobbed up once slammed against a rock, then began to sink again. A shape inside struggled. A fist pounded against shattered glass. Graham, the man who terrorized Rebecca, who cut her brakes, who nearly killed the girls, who hunted us like prey. Rebecca clasped my arm, her voice barely a whisper. "Jake, let him drown. Let it end here." Her words trembled with years of pain, years of nightmares, Years of being silenced, and for a moment I considered it. The river would finish what he started. No courts, no trials, no more terror. But then I looked at the girls clutching Tom, their small faces watching me, needing me to be someone worth trusting, someone worth following, someone who did not become the same kind of monster we were running from. I pushed myself up. I am not doing it for him. I am doing it because they are watching. I slid down the embankment rocks, slicing my palms. The water was freezing, hitting me like a wall. The SUV had wedged itself between boulders, the back half still visible. Graham thrashed inside, fighting the rising water. His eyes met mine, wild with panic. "Help me!" He choked on river water. "Help me!" I dove, wrapping my hands around the mangled door. Metal bent, painfully slow, cutting into my fingers. I pulled until my muscles screamed. The door gave, water surged in. Graham spilled out, coughing and clawing at me. "Do not touch me!" I shoved him upward, letting the current push him toward the bank. Tom was already there to drag him out. As soon as Graham hit the dirt, 2 sets of headlights flashed through the trees. Sirens, state troopers, 3 vehicles. Radios crackled. Officers poured out, weapons drawn but lowering quickly when Tom raised his badge. Former investigator. They knew him, and he had called them hours earlier saying he feared an interstate kidnapping in progress. Graham lay on the ground, coughing, spitting river water, screaming about conspiracies and stolen family and his rights. But none of it mattered. The officers were already reading him his charges: kidnapping, domestic violence, attempted murder, violation of protective orders, tampering with evidence, unlawful detainment, and more coming once the investigation expanded. Rebecca stood behind me, her hand trembling in mine. The girls clung to her legs. Graham looked up at us, furious, drenched, defeated. "You are all finished, every one of you." I stepped forward, not in anger but in truth. "No, Graham. You are." The world did not slow down after Graham was arrested. If anything, it sped up, roaring forward like a train that had been waiting years to finally leave the station. Within hours, the ravine filled with state troopers, forensic teams, social workers, and investigators climbing over the twisted metal remains of the SUV. Reporters swarmed the lodge entrance once news leaked that a prominent businessman had been pulled from a river in handcuffs. But none of that mattered to me in those first moments. All I cared about was Rebecca sitting on the back bumper of an ambulance wrapped in a blanket, her eyes half dazed as she held the girls close. Nora shivered even though the night was warm. Lenny kept her face buried in her mother's shirt. They looked like 3 people who had been running for far too long and had finally collapsed. I stood a few feet away, letting them breathe, letting them feel safety without crowding them. An officer approached me with a clipboard, asking for my full statement, but his voice felt muted beneath the weight of everything that had happened. I answered his questions mechanically, my mind drifting back to the moment the bridge collapsed, the moment the SUV plunged into the river, the moment I had to choose what kind of man the girls would see me be. When I finished, Tom walked over, fatigue dragging heavily across his face. His clothes were soaked and torn, and dried blood streaked the side of his forehead, but there was something solid in his posture. Determination. Not relief. Not yet. "Jake, we are not done," he said. This was only the beginning. He was right. A helicopter hovered above, shining its spotlight on the ridge. Officers hustled around us with the urgency of people who knew a high-profile storm was brewing. Graham was already being transported to the county detention center, screaming threats through a mouthful of river water. The next morning, the courthouse was surrounded by cameras vans and crowds hungry for a story. Reporters shouted questions across the sidewalk as officers escorted Graham out of the transport van, his wrists cuffed, his face swollen from the river rocks. He kept his chin lifted like a man too arrogant to understand the ground beneath him had split open. The girls and Rebecca were nowhere near the courthouse that day. I stayed by their side in protective housing provided by the state, a quiet rented cabin where the windows were locked and the blinds stayed drawn. Even there, the girls clung to Rebecca, unwilling to leave her arms for more than a few seconds. When the hearing began, Tom and I watched the live stream from an old television in the cabin's living room. The judge read the charges one by one: attempted vehicular homicide, domestic battery, kidnapping, unlawful detainment, evidence tampering, coercive control, violation of protective orders. When the brake line evidence was presented, the courtroom fell silent. Then the dashcam data from the destroyed SUV was shown. Then the medical reports. Then the testimony from the guard who had cracked under pressure and finally stepped forward to admit everything he had seen in that mountain lodge. He described the way Graham kept Rebecca locked in isolation, how he refused to let the girls sleep with lights on, how he ordered his men to retrieve the family at any cost. The world watching through screens felt the same thing I felt sitting on that couch with my hands clenched. Rage, disgust, recognition. Abuse hidden under wealth was a story America knew too well. The judge denied bail on every count. Graham erupted, shouting obscenities at the courtroom. He pointed toward this camera, toward the world. "They stole my family. They set me up. I will bury every one of them." Officers dragged him out as he kicked against the floor, his face red, his spit flying. Nora, who had been curled beside me on the sofa, lifted her head just in time to see his face before the feed cut to commercial. She buried her face into my arm and whispered, "Make him go away. Forever." I wrapped an arm around her, my voice quiet. "He cannot hurt you anymore. Not ever again." The trial preparations lasted weeks. Investigators uncovered years of concealed files, paid settlements, silenced witnesses, and medical records hidden under false names. The story spread across the country. Politicians distanced themselves from Graham. Business partners issued statements pretending they had known nothing. Former employees flooded hotlines with stories they had been too afraid to tell. And through it all, Rebecca grew steadier, her voice stronger, her shoulders less hunched. She testified behind closed doors with a child advocate by her side, describing years of manipulation, threats, and violence. I waited outside the room during her testimony, pacing the carpet with a knot in my chest. When she finally walked out, she looked exhausted but unbroken. She met my eyes and whispered, "Thank you for being here." When the verdict finally came down months later, the courtroom was packed. Tom sat beside me. I could feel the tension in him, the hope and the fear twisting together. Graham was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, wrists cuffed, eyes wild. The judge read the sentence calmly without theatrics. 34 years. No parole for the first 20. Mandatory rehabilitation. Permanent restraining order. Loss of custody. Loss of voting rights. Lifetime firearm prohibition. Graham snapped. He lunged toward the bench, screaming that this was not justice, that Rebecca was his, that the girls belonged to him. Officers slammed him to the ground as the courtroom erupted. I glanced at Tom. He let out a long breath, shoulders dropping relief, slowly settling in. "Justice," he murmured, "the kind people want to believe in." When we returned to the cabin, Rebecca was sitting on the couch with the girls curled against her. Their tiny hands were intertwined, as if they feared letting go would make the world crumble again. I stepped inside quietly. Rebecca looked up, her eyes brimming as she whispered, "Is it over?" I nodded. For the first time since the night of the explosion, I saw her exhale without shaking. She kissed the tops of her daughters' heads and closed her eyes. Nora slid off the couch and walked toward me slowly. She took my hand with both of hers. "Jake," she said, her voice small but steady. "Are we safe now?" I knelt down to her level, meeting her gaze. "Yes, completely." She leaned into me, hugging my neck. Lenny joined her, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. I held them both as Rebecca watched tears slipping down her cheeks, but they were not tears of fear this time. They were the kind that come when a person sees a future they never believed they would live to witness. That night, after the girls fell asleep, Rebecca stepped onto the porch where I stood under the quiet dark. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked up at me. "You saved us, Jake, more than once." I shook my head gently. "You saved yourselves. I just refused to look away." She smiled softly, the first real smile I had seen from her, full of something fragile and blooming. Hope. But hope, like healing, was slow, and we still had a long road ahead. Winter came early that year, sweeping across the mountains with a quiet that felt almost reverent, as if the world itself understood we were trying to build something fragile and new. Snow dusted the fields behind my farmhouse, settling softly on the fence I had repaired after the night everything fell apart. The air smelled of pine and distant chimney smoke. The kind that made you breathe a little slower, a little deeper. I was repairing a cracked step on the porch when I heard tires crunching along the gravel drive. For a moment, my chest tightened. Old instincts, old fears. But when the car door opened and I heard small feet hitting the ground, I knew. Nora ran up the steps first, her pink hat slipping over one eye, her little boots leaving prints across the snow. Lenny followed close behind, dragging a paper bag crumpled at the top. And behind them, Rebecca stepped out of the car holding a warm pie in both hands, her breath rising in white clouds. She looked different, lighter, stronger. The bruises had faded the tension in her shoulders, no longer sharp and defensive. She caught my eye, her expression somewhere between nervous and hopeful. I opened the door wider without thinking. Nora tugged at my sleeve. "We brought pie." Lenny held up the bag. "And socks. Mommy said you needed more warm socks." Rebecca laughed, embarrassed. They insisted. I stepped aside. "Come in." The girls ran past me, their laughter filling the quiet rooms like a balm I had forgotten I needed. Rebecca paused at the threshold the same way she had the first night she ever entered this house, but this time the fear was gone. She placed the pie on the counter and slipped off her gloves. The silence settled between us, warm and familiar. I did not ask why they came. She did not explain. Some things do not need words. The girls explored the house like returning explorers marking familiar territory. They checked the hooks where their little jackets had once hung. They peeked into the guest room where they had slept during the first days of fear and hiding. They ran fingers across the windowsill where they had drawn shapes in the dust. Everything was the same, but everything was different. When they disappeared into the barn to look for the chickens, Rebecca joined me at the table. Her eyes softened as she looked around. "I never thought I would see this place again." I nodded. "I never thought you would walk through that door again." She smiled, quiet and shy. "I wanted to. I just needed time." We spoke for a while about small things about the weather and the girls' new school and how she had finally started sleeping through the night without waking in panic. Every time her sleeve shifted, I saw the faint outline of a restraining order bracelet on her wrist, a reminder that danger had once lived in her own home. But that danger was gone now, locked behind walls and court orders, and the truth that finally came to light. The girls returned with snow on their coats, breathless and glowing. They convinced me to make hot chocolate the way I used to, with too much whipped cream and marshmallows floating unevenly. Rebecca watched me with an expression I could not quite name, somewhere between gratitude and something deeper. When the cups were empty and the sugar rushed through the house like a storm, the girls settled onto the worn couch, curling up in blankets. The room filled with the soft sound of children drifting to sleep. Rebecca and I stepped outside to the porch, careful not to wake them. The night was still. Snowflakes drifted slowly under the porch light, catching the warm glow like tiny sparks. For a long time, we stood shoulder to shoulder without speaking. She breathed in deeply. "Jake," she murmured, "I have been trying to figure out what home is supposed to feel like. I kept looking for something big. I thought it would hit me all at once." She paused. "But I think it is smaller than I thought. I think it is moments, like this one." Her words landed softly like snow on warm ground. I looked at her hands resting on the porch rail. They were not trembling anymore. Mine reached toward them without thought. She did not pull away. Instead, her fingers curled gently around mine, the gesture steady and sure. She turned toward me, her voice lower. "The girls have been asking where we belong now. I told them I did not know yet. I thought we would just keep searching. But today, Nora told me she already knows. She said she wants to stay somewhere that feels safe and warm. She said that place was here." My breath caught a knot forming in my chest. Rebecca stepped closer, her voice nearly a whisper. "I want that too, but only if you do." I looked through the window at the girls sleeping on my couch, wrapped in blankets that had stayed folded in that closet for far too many years. I thought about the nights after my own son died when the house had felt so unbearably silent it echoed. And then I thought about the past weeks, the laughter, the footsteps, the healing, the courage. I closed my hand around hers, grounding us both. "I do," I said quietly. "More than you know." She leaned her head against my shoulder, her breath warming the cold air. For the first time in years, the world did not feel heavy. It felt right, complete, connected. Inside, the girls stirred and mumbled sleepy sounds. Rebecca smiled. "We should go in. They will roll off the couch if we leave them too long." We walked inside together. The fire crackled in the hearth. The house no longer felt empty. It felt lived and alive, carrying the soft pulse of a future trying to form. As the girls curled into my sides half asleep, Rebecca knelt beside the couch. She whispered, "We are home, girls. Safe now. Truly safe." Lenny blinked up at me. "Can we stay forever? Jake?" I brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Forever sounds just right. Later, as the house settled into quiet and snow blanketed the fields outside, I stood in the doorway watching them sleep. The girls, Rebecca, the warmth, the peace. The life I thought I had lost. A life rebuilt from ashes. A family I never expected but now could not imagine losing. I saved them from a fire that night, but in the months that followed, they saved me from a fire of my own. One I carried for years without knowing. The flames finally went out, and for the first time since my son died, I breathed in a future that was warm, whole, and ours. Sometimes a story does more than entertain us. Sometimes it sits quietly in the room long after the last scene fades, asking us to breathe a little deeper, to remember a piece of ourselves we thought the world had forgotten. If you stayed with Jake and Rebecca and the girls until this moment, then something in their journey must have touched you. Maybe because you have known loss. Maybe because you have known fear. Maybe because you have known what it feels like to fight for hope with hands that shake. Stories like this remind us that healing does not always come loud or fast. Often it comes in small steps, in quiet kitchens, in shared warmth on cold nights, in the courage it takes to trust again when life has taken too much from you. Maybe you connected with Jake, a man who carried grief in the silence of an old farmhouse, a man who kept working with his hands because that was the only way he knew how to keep breathing. Maybe you saw yourself in Rebecca, someone who learned that survival and strength can live in the same body, someone who finally walked through a door she thought would never open again. Or maybe you felt something stir when you saw two little girls laughing on a porch after believing the world would never feel safe. These moments matter. These moments linger. And if they stayed with you, then you are exactly the kind of heart this channel was made for. Here we honor the quiet heroes, the people who show up even when no one is watching, the people who keep others alive even when they themselves are breaking, the people who prove that compassion is not weakness, but the strongest force we have left in a world that often forgets how much we need each other. If you believe in second chances, in redemption, in courage that rises when life tries to crush it, then stay with us. If you believe that justice should not belong only to the powerful, that healing can happen even after the deepest wounds, that family can be found in places you never expected, then this place is yours. And if this story made you feel something real, even if it was just for a moment, I want to invite you to take one small step that helps us keep telling stories that remind people what humanity looks like at its best. Tap the like button. Leave a comment if you have lived through something that changed you. Share the video with someone who might need a reminder that light can still find them. And if you want more stories that reach into the quiet corners of the heart and stay there long after the screen goes dark, then subscribe to this channel. It seems like a simple thing, but it tells the platform that stories about courage and kindness, stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, stories about survival and love and healing deserve to be heard. Your support keeps these stories alive. Your presence keeps this community warm. Before you go, take one breath with me, a slow one, in and out. And remember this. You were meant to survive the things that tried to break you. You were meant to find your way back to something steady. And you were meant to hear stories that remind you you are not alone in this world. Thank you for being here. Thank you for feeling with us. Thank you for giving stories like this a home. And until we meet again in the next tale, may you stay gentle, stay brave, and trust that somewhere out there, the life you are meant to step into is already walking towards you.